Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, maybe, everyone. Happy World Rainforest Day, and welcome to day 2 of the summit. If you were here yesterday on day 1, welcome back. And if this is your first day, welcome. I see a lot of people moving around on the map and exploring that feature. If this is your first time using Gatherly, I just want to give a very brief introduction to everything you see on your screen before we hop into our first session. So the map that you see, which is frozen now, is where networking will happen. And anytime there's not a session or a broadcast going on, you can click anybody's icon on the map and hop right into a video chat with them. We really encourage everybody to get the most out of this platform. It's such a quick way to just connect with anyone from all around the world. We do have designated networking hours, so if you open the brochure at the top, you can actually see our agenda for the day, including when networking is scheduled to happen. That's the hour that will really encourage everyone to hop on the map and move around from topic to topic. The labeled areas on the map correspond to the topics that are going to be discussed there. So if you're interested in talking about restoration, we encourage you to hop on over to that little pond and connect with other people who are in that area. Any other notes? If you click the attendees button under the map, you'll see who else is online right now. We do have a lot of people trickling in and out throughout the day, just according to their time zones. So we encourage you to keep looking at who's online and connecting with anybody that you want to connect with. We're about to start off our first session. So in just a few seconds, I'll introduce Krista from the Morpho Institute to start us off for today. But I want to say happy World Rainforest Day. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and a big thank you as well to everybody who donated in the registration process. That everything you've donated goes directly to Rainforest Partnerships projects on the ground in the Ecuadorian Amazon, built in collaboration with Quechua women. So thank you for helping power that impact. And one last thing, we'll put a link in the chat box for a guide to Gatherly if you want a little bit more information about how to use the platform. But everything you see here is everything that's going to be available throughout the day, the networking and the sessions. So we hope you enjoy today. We hope you enjoy the sessions and you learn something. And above all, we hope you make some meaningful connections. So thank you, everyone. And let's jump right into our first session of the day.
There we go. Hey, everybody. My name is Krista Dillabaugh, and as the director of the Morpho Institute, I just want to thank Rainforest Partnership and World Rainforest Day for inviting us to host this panel discussion on the importance of the role that education plays in rainforest conservation. Yesterday, when keynote speaker Governor Gary Huffa was asked what people outside rainforest countries can do to help, his response was, quote, "The best way people can help is to learn about what's happening in forested communities." So we're just delighted to be hosting this panel session and get to share in this discussion with a number of our partners and friends that are working around the world in rainforest conservation. Here at the Morpho Institute, we provide professional learning opportunities for primary and secondary educators. We take them to the Peruvian Amazon where they learn and work with local communities and our indigenous partners. And then we empower them to bring this work back home to their home communities to teach their students and communities about the importance of the Amazon and its importance to the health of our global ecosystem. We are immensely grateful to be able to do this work in the ancestral lands of the Mayahuna, and we're privileged to be welcome guests and partners in their efforts to protect nearly 1 million acres of Peruvian Amazon rainforest. So let's get started. We've asked Ava Goodale to lead this panel discussion on what is the most important thing in rainforest education. Ava is a global educator, a sustainability education advocate, an alumna of Morpho Institute field programs, and she is our guide and mentor in developing culturally sensitive and responsive teaching resources to help others learn about the Mayahuna and their conservation story. So Ava, I'm going to turn it over to you and the panelists for a very wonderful and lively discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista, and thank you, Nia. Thank you all for being here. I am excited to be a part of World Rainforest Day and excited to help facilitate this panel this morning, at least in my time zone. Before we jump in, I want to start with just a quick prompt in the chat, just to sort of help everyone arrive and create a little virtual space for ourselves. So if you all on the panel and in the audience could take just 30 seconds, maybe a minute, to think of a time and place that you experienced awe, feeling of awe. So recall that moment and that place and try and bring it back into the forefront of your mind. And then in the chat, just type in a couple words that describe that moment and place to other people. So you're just thinking of a moment where you experienced awe, as in connecting to something vast, bigger than yourself, and throw in the chat a couple words that describe that moment or place to other people. So as the chat is filling up, feel free to scroll through that or just continue to sort of relive that moment for a second as we all kind of arrive here together. Wonderful. All right, well, let's jump in. Thank you for sharing those. Keep them coming as we sort of launch into things. This is sort of an opening to connect to rainforests and that vastness that we maybe have experienced in a place like rainforests or other places. So that is really just to sort of help us all arrive here around our shared love for the rainforest. So let me jump in. Let me do a quick introduction of the Morpho Institute and then what we are hoping to do in this panel session. So again, my name is Ava Goodale. I'm an educator. I've worked with the Morpho Institute. The Morpho Institute is a nonprofit that is really working on education as a driving force behind a larger collective goal of conserving the rainforest. So really the Morpho Institute is providing professional development programs for educators and learners and working on curricular resources around local and global environmental stewardship, really focused on the K through 12 level. And again, there's sort of this larger vision about bringing the Amazon as a treasured and protected global resource and ensuring that that is available and conserved for generations to come. And that brings us really to the theme of this session, which is really around this larger question of what matters most in rainforest education. And through this panel, we're going to try and dissect that question a little bit, tear it apart, think about it, and see what questions we arrive at as a group. And the way we're going to do this is we have a series of panel questions, but the questions are almost designed as a workshop. And I would encourage participants to sort of follow along with these questions and maybe jot their own ideas down. And the questions are from A Liberating Structure, which is a book and a website, but it's really just a tool that helps think about challenges and innovations and problem solving. So this series of questions comes from that resource, and we're using it in this way to really think about what matters most in rainforest education. So that's the big idea of what we're doing. So I'll throw out some questions to our panelists. We'll save time at the end for some audience questions. So before we do that, I want to make sure we do just a very quick introduction from each panelist. So I'll just prompt each person, and if folks could just share their name, their organization, and maybe just in 1 or 2 sentences, share with the audience who you are. So Lilly, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Lilly Briggs, and I'm the founder and director of a nonprofit organization based here in the very south of Costa Rica, but we're a Canadian, Costa Rican nonprofit because I'm Canadian, so we have status in both countries. And we focus on environmental education. I like to say environmental education is at the core of everything we do. And we put forest restoration and birds as, we use them as our pillars or our vehicles, so to speak, for creating environmental education experiences for diverse audiences in the community. So happy World Rainforest Day.
Thank you, Lilly. Megan, can we hear from you?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Megan McDaniel. I'm the current executive director of CONAPAC, which is a Peruvian nonprofit operating in Iquitos, Peru. We have 52 partner communities along the Amazon and Napo rivers, and I am the only non-Peruvian on paid staff. I am a former high school science teacher, and so I bring to this position a focus on education, but I also really focus on community-based conservation and making sure that our conversations include voices of more than just top-down kind of structures.
Thank you, Megan. Ursula, also in Peru, I believe.
Yes, good morning. My name is Ursula Valdez. I'm a tropical avian ecologist and conservationist, and I have several hats that I wear. So I'm faculty at University of Washington, Bothell, but right now I'm in Peru, Southeast Peru, Madre de Dios. I'm with CECCOT, which is the Center for Education and Conservation and Science in Tambopata in Madre de Dios, and I'm the director and founder. There is also a sister organization called Friends at CECCOT in the United States also. And here what we do is similar to what Lilly described and also Megan, we're like using birds as a focus for our work based on research and capacity building. One of the main goals is to train Peruvian students and everybody who wants to be trained in field ecology and bird ecology research methods to study birds and other wildlife. And then we use that as a kind of a center for environmental education, focus on birds, and at the same time, ecotourism, avian tourism. So right now I'm in this fantastic center, which is Hacienda Herrera CECCOT, which is the result of our organization and a local family efforts. We join efforts and we have an ecological field station. I'm currently with Miami University of Ohio students in Earth expeditions, teaching a field class, so that's what I'm here. Thank you very much. And yeah.
That's so wonderful. The background sounds are so pleasant there. Wonderful. All right, Claire, can we hear from you?
Hey everybody, I'm Claire Lannoye-Hall. I am the Director of Education for the Detroit Zoological Society. So I'm here just north of Detroit in Michigan in the United States. I have had the privilege of working with CONAPAC since 2007, mainly through their Adopt a School program, which provides school supplies to those 52 or however many partner communities we have that year, ensuring that they have access to education and the materials they need to do so, and alleviating that financial responsibility from the families that comes along with trying to purchase all those school supplies. And we've continued to expand our involvement in partnership. Right now we are continuing a partnership supporting the Mahuna in their quest to prevent or slow the building of a road that will connect Iquitos all the way up to Colombia and has the potential to do a tremendous amount of damage to the rainforest ecosystem. So we're continuing to expand our involvement and support in that capacity and continue to learn together on what all of that means.
Thank you, Claire. All right, so let's jump in now. So as you can tell from our introductions, clearly where we all overlap is around education for the rainforest. So this is where we're really coming together to think about what matters most in that space of rainforest education. And we're going to tackle a specific goal related to that. So we're thinking about how do educators compel others to take action to conserve, restore, and regenerate rainforests. So that's really this big goal. How do we do that? What are the best, most effective ways to do that? And to start to answer that question as a panel, we're going to break it down and actually almost come at that question in the opposite way. So sort of backing into it. So the question for the panel, and I encourage again audience members to sort of answer this for themselves also as we go. So our first question, what could educators do to ensure that we achieve the worst imaginable results with respect to this goal about compelling others to take action about the rainforest? So how could we ensure that that doesn't happen? How can we make sure that we have the worst outcome toward that goal? So we'll go around and maybe hear 2 or 3 ideas from people on the panel. And folks, again, at home can kind of keep a list also for themselves. So does anyone want to kick us off?
I'm happy to kick us off because I've been thinking a lot about this. So for me, one of the most important things we can do, so I'll phrase it as the way we can achieve the opposite, is to not have continued engagement. I think there's often a real lack of continued engagement around both education, and that also ties to our philosophy with forest restoration. And something I learned when I first moved here a few years ago, when I was brand new to forest restoration, not to environmental education, because that was my background, my PhD, all the work I'd done to this point. But in terms of forest restoration, I didn't have any real hands-on experience. And I learned early on to call it tree growing and not tree planting, because there's too much emphasis often on just like the one-off, let's get everyone out and excited about planting a tree and taking a fun photo with our trees, and then everyone goes home and forgets about their trees. And the forest is not going to grow without that ongoing engagement and stewardship and maintenance and investment. And I think it's a really beautiful parallel to education. And I think that if we want to have the worst possible outcome, we don't look to the future of how we're going to have a continued engagement. And that's one of the things I find actually most challenging in these early years of running my organization, since we just started in 2020, is, like I said, it's relatively easy to, invite people out for the day of the planting, but I really want to see them coming back over and over again to participate in the maintenance and, the weeding and the composting and the watching their trees grow and seeing that, look, some of the trees aren't going to make it. There is going to be, some mortality in restoration projects, but that's, part of the process. And what other challenges could come up? We have leafcutter ants attacking our trees, or we have, weather that makes it challenging for the trees to grow and all that kind of thing. So I think, the parallel of it's tree growing, not tree planting, and how we can apply that to education and think of education as tree growing or growing and the continuity rather than the planting. I think the worst thing we can do is just see it as the planting, the one-off. Of course, we don't want to say, okay, having no exposure is better than nothing, but at the same time, sometimes these one-off experiences, they don't create the impact and the motivation and the empowerment and the capacity that I know as educators we all want to cultivate in order to create positive change over the long term.
Fantastic. Yeah, the metaphor there of tree growing versus tree planting is great. So those one-off experiences would help us make sure we got the worst possible outcome here. Great. Yeah. Other folks, Ursula, you.
Sure, I can go. Yeah, Lily, you're totally right. Not managing the process. So I can add to that the fact that we tend to not be very humble, and not intentionally. That's one of the things that happened to many of us. Me as a scientist, as an educator, when we are younger, when you're with no much experience, you think that you're learning all this vast amount of things, so much enthusiasm and intentions, and you lack actually the opportunity to recognize the local context. And when you get to a place with all these intentions, I'm going to educate people, I'm going to teach people, it's like you are not recognizing all the potential and these communities that these people in these places where it's their daily life and all the issues associated to that. Then I feel like we all have made that mistake, not with intention, but that has always put a little bit more resistance. So it can affect your engagement. It can affect the efficiency of your activities. It's just like be humble, recognize first, recognize ancestral knowledge, all of those things that we have for so long have forgotten. And now fortunately, we're making a big effort to start with that, to recognize the local context, to recognize the capacity and the potential that those people that we're trying to educate, actually, we can make it much more of a vertical collaboration rather than this idea of, I think one of you mentioned this top-down approach, which I don't think has ever helped in any effort. I'll leave it at that. I bet there's some other ideas that can be.
Thank you, Ursula.
I'd love to chime in. Oh, Claire, you unmuted at the same time. Along those same lines, by the way, Lily, I wrote down what you said about calling it tree growing. We also have a tree initiative in our programs, and I kind of want to steal that. That's so powerful. Thank you.
I didn't make it that far.
But with that threaded with what Ursula just said, making the assumption that we come at this with all of the answers anybody else needs, right? One thing I really appreciate about CONAPAC before I arrived is that nothing we do is prescriptive. We don't walk into a community and say, we know exactly what you need. You need clean water. Here's a clean water filtration system. Like, that doesn't work. You can't approach situations like that. You have to come in with the idea that maybe you have some solutions, but you have to see what is needed, what is desired, where people want to take their next steps, and walk almost behind them and not even next to them, but definitely not in front of them. So I love that. I love it when I get together with people that have similar mindsets in these situations.
I only have one small thing to add after everything else that's been shared that's been phenomenal. I think we often take, and I know that we've been guilty of it here at the zoo, is we're trying to engage other folks into these initiatives. Oftentimes there's this doom and gloom approach, right? And we are very guilty of like having one of those giant number counter downs of like how much rainforest is being destroyed on the wall, and somehow that's supposed to inspire someone to go and take action and care about these places, and it doesn't work. So thinking really thoughtfully about how we're instilling wonder and wow and providing experiences that truly get people inspired to make a difference within their locus of control, providing them that sense of empowerment. It's really critical that we move past some of these proven, disproven theories of how we're going to do that, and start instilling, like I said, that wonder and wow instead.
Wonderful. Okay, so this is sort of to set us up as, you know, what's kind of the opposite of where we want to go. So our next question, and this really is a moment of sort of self-reflection for our own roles, our own organizations. But this next question, we're thinking about all the items we just discussed, and I can touch on them again before we jump in. But of all those things we just mentioned, is there anything that we as educators, you know, sort of largely or individually, are currently doing that resembles those items in any way? So even indirectly, loosely, are we doing those things maybe inadvertently, like Ursula said, or in some way? So the things we talked about, just to recap before we jump into that, are focusing on maybe one-off experiences and sort of that product, not so much the process. So this is our tree growing versus tree planting. Not being humble, so sort of thinking that we're coming in with all the expertise and sort of overriding that local experience and local community. And that relates to that top-down approach, and assuming we have all the answers, coming in with a really prescriptive style. Walking in front of the community would help us get the worst imaginable result. And then hitting hard on that doom and gloom, and maybe also hitting on things that would be outside of someone's locus of control. So of those things, and maybe we come up with other ones as we go, are there any things that we as educators are currently doing that resembles those approaches in any way? Anyone can kick us off.
Okay, I'll start. I will say that we don't longer do it as much. So I feel like we've done it in the past, and I mean, I've myself received some of that kind of education, in which is, you know, just one way to do things. Yes, knowledge is important, but it's missing that participatory aspect that engage people when, as Claire said, you discover something. So I learned in certain way that it inspired me to be a biologist, yes, for the vast amount of knowledge, but it was much until later that I realized that I didn't own that way to learn. It was only received. And I feel like, yes, early on, and again, I say without any intention, you're just following the trend, right? You're following a school of way to do things that you think is the only way to do things. But fortunately, I feel like, and I'm not sure if I speak for all of us in here, but I feel like we're fortunate, and I feel myself very fortunate that I have been experienced kind of like halfway my education in graduate school, that this opportunity to go and work much more with local people, engage with them in a much more, again, horizontal way in which there's no that assumption that I know more than them. I know certain things that may be different than them, but it's much more a way how we complement things. And the other really key aspect is that if we don't recognize that own personal curiosity, we don't recognize all those things that make us the star of something and all, as you mentioned with us, then we don't own that excitement. We don't appreciate things that it can cause us wonder. And if we get suppressed by an educator, because it has happened, I still see actually in some of the educational activities that we do with the schools here, in what the professor will say, oh, no, that's not the way. And I'm like, wait, let's let them express, like the curiosity is people have curious ways and people learn differently, appreciate different, capture different elements of, if I'm looking at a bird, I may be looking at the colors, maybe another person is looking at the sound, it's paying attention to the sounds, maybe some other person is paying attention what the bird are doing and all those things. So it uses this opportunity to participate. So, and then I can own that piece and I can feel value for that piece. If then, my teacher or my instructor considered that little element that was critical for putting communal knowledge, and as a way makes a much stronger knowledge for everybody. So I feel like fortunate that we have moved away from our own personal experiences, that they were not necessarily the ones that make us feel comfortable into like moving in bringing opportunities for people to no longer have that attitude like, I don't know anything, you know all, I don't want to talk because I'm not an expert on this. And it's like, come on, let's own the little things that bring our curiosity. And if it creates that like, wow, did you see that? And you get that, then it brings power to you. And I think that at different times in the life of humans, we have had all these different elements of discovery. So again, and maybe I'm going again the other way around, but it's like what we did in the past and how we are like seeing the world differently now.
Yeah, those are definitely two widespread patterns, just repeating how we had our own educational experiences. And often that is sort of this role of the teacher as the expert and the keeper of all knowledge, and sort of that sage on the stage role of a teacher. So that might be sort of a counterproductive activity that creates that list that we talked about before. So other folks, any other counterproductive activities that are really at play in the larger educational setting or in your work or communities?
I would love to chime in and just add to what Ursula's saying by one of our, I think, weak spots is having enough voices in our decision-making process. And, there's some barriers that we have to overcome to make that happen. But if we want community voice at a higher level, not just within the community, but just in some of the other decisions that CONAPAC makes, having those voices at the table has been difficult. And it is something that we think about and talk about. And to do that, writing that into the part of our grant proposal or a request for funding, like making sure that we're including all of those pieces, it's something that we have a weak spot for. And, I would love to see that we grow from that. And I think that as an educator, putting on my educator hat, just the same thing, just making decision making part of something that everyone in the room can do, not just the educator, the teacher, the leader, the person at the front of the table, right? But that you really bring in voices at all levels. And that kind of helps to address all of the other things that we've been mentioning about not being the person that comes in with holding all of the power and the knowledge. It helps to do that. But I know that we as an organization can look for ways to do that even better than we already are.
Thank you, Megan. Other ideas on counterproductive strategies at play?
I was just going to add to what Megan and Ursula have already articulated so well, which is just the need to get more voices at the table, and Ursula's use of the word humility really resonated with me, and just thinking about the fact that, you know, even though I like to think as an organization, Finca Cántaros has engaged lots of, you know, community members and voices, you know, I'll admit we didn't sort of sit down with people before we started our tree growing projects. We kind of just dove in and everyone around us was excited, but you know, it got me, this panel and these comments have gotten me reflecting on, well, what about the voices that we didn't hear from? You know, there's kind of, we kind of operate in a bit of an echo chamber, right? Because, you know, when people ask me, well, how is the community responding to the work you're doing? And I say, well, everything I hear is positive, but of course I'm not necessarily hearing the negative, right? And I didn't actually sit down with kind of a more broad cross-section of members of the community to see what they would be interested in having on the land that we've been doing our forest restoration on. So that word humility is, you know, is really going around in my head and thinking about how, you know, we just make an assumption, well, people get excited about trees and about forests, but I'm sure there's lots of people in the community that we haven't heard from that would be perhaps more excited about seeing more agroforestry or agroecology type projects that provide, you know, food security or look at different sustainable food systems. And that's partly because I feel like I have a better grasp now on how to grow trees, you know, like native species of trees to create forests, rather than diving into a whole other realm, which is, you know, growing food systems. You know, I forayed a little bit into that at the beginning, and it was so overwhelming and it required so much that I was like, oh, I don't think I'm ready for that quite yet. So that's something, you know, I'm thinking about for the future. But, you know, just thinking about the fact that even though on the one hand, I feel as though we've engaged different voices and actors in our work and our decisions, at the same time, it was very biased towards, you know, voices that were supportive of what we were doing. And I think for future restoration projects, or if we're able to acquire more land through grants or donations and whatnot, thinking about having more of a community panel, a town hall, to see what people will be interested in having there. Because it's very easy to say, well, everyone's excited about our tree growing projects, but if we're not asking people to share counterpoints, if we're not asking for the audience that might have counterpoints to join in on the conversation, we're definitely going to be missing a huge piece there. So to thinking about that. So thank you to both Ursula and Megan for those comments.
That's
Lily,
great.
If
So
I can
really-
build
Sure.
like directly
Claire?
off of that, sorry. One of the biggest challenges I see on our side as being an institution who has access to funds, who often is looking for opportunities to send them out, is that we don't often build in to those projects the patience to have those conversations, right? Oftentimes the conservation that we're ready to fund and thinking about funding has to be associated with numbers and all this quantitative data of hectares and trees growing or trees planted, and there's not often that space and time that we build in to make sure those authentic connections are happening and that those Indigenous voices are being heard and that all those perspectives are at the table. And I think it's a huge flaw amongst the conservation field that I do see some movement on. I am starting to see some capacity of that, but at the same time, it can be tremendously frustrating. In order to get some of these grant funds, they have to put in these numbers that we may not have the capacity to collect. And at the same time, again, you're losing that connection with the people, which is a critical part of conservation. That's people and conservation are one and the same thing. It's not just the species that we're out there trying to protect. It's the people who are living in those spaces as well. So it's an incredibly frustrating thing to me that I do see some movement on, but I think we have a tremendous way to go for it still.
And like you said, there's always that juggling act between the funders and the numbers and the grants and the timing and the, just let's be honest about our own time and energy and resources and how much you invest in these, community meetings versus like getting out there and growing the trees. And so, it's been a real eye-opener since I started Finca Cántaros to see how quickly your day gets eaten up with everything. And at the end of the day, you're like, wait, but I had all these idealistic visions about, how much I was going to be talking to the community and then doing this and doing that. And then it's like, well, I don't have, 100 hours in a day. I haven't, been able to bend time that way. So I think that's a really important point that you're bringing to the table, Claire.
Wonderful. So great, thinking of how can we engage people who might be on the margins of the communities that we're talking and thinking about, and then thinking about how sort of that balance of needing to measure things that are very difficult to measure, and providing sort of that space and patience for these things to unravel over a longer time period, which is difficult against the realities of different worlds. Okay, so I'm going to keep us moving along. We have these ideas of counterproductive activities in our own roles, and then even larger across education. So now that we sort of have a good picture of where we don't want to be, we can start really thinking about how are we pulling towards this goal? What matters most in education? How do we compel others to take action? So now we can really dig into what steps, what things are we doing to move away from those counterproductive activities and create those desirable results that we want, which again is really compelling others to take action on behalf of rainforests and the people who live there. So this is a great chance to really dig into some of these strategies that we've already been talking about, how you do that in your roles and your organizations, and then also how we can beyond that sort of in a larger educational setting.
I'm going to try to grab this one first. And I'm going to steal a little bit of Megan's thunder too. I should have mentioned at the beginning that I sit on the CONAPAC board, so I'm incredibly familiar and invested with CONAPAC. Part of what CONAPAC does is teacher workshops, which is connecting teachers in the area. And there's been a tremendous focus lately on including Peruvian educators in to come and share their practices and their indigenous knowledge, which has been phenomenal. And several years ago, we started a WhatsApp chat amongst some of the teachers who were in the workshops. And the value that chat we have for the program for the teachers. It connected hundreds of rural remote area of the rainforest. So they had a social support network. They've been sharing things that they've been doing in their classrooms. There's a little bit of competitiveness from time to time where they're trying to like one up each other, but it's this constant way of them supporting each other. It allows us to see what's happening on the ground, to see where there's opportunities for us to continue building on things. What really stuck with them from teacher workshops and what they're excited about. Then you get to actually see these things in person when you go out to the communities. But this network that we created has just morphed into something more than I think we ever could have imagined. And watching them all communicate amongst each other, both celebrating things, it's actually been a way for them to deal with like tragedy, things that's happened within their communities and in the surrounding area. And I just could not be, I wish I had the time to go through every chat and every comment that was made in there and do some sort of a research study, because I think it could be an absolutely phenomenal model of ways to engage. But just what a cool thing that evolved out of something unintentionally and has really provided us a tremendous amount of insight into the day-to-day of what it is to be an educator in these rural remote communities, struggling with all of these different challenges they face, and they're still showing up for their kids and investing in the future of the rainforest. So it's amazing. Again, unintentional, but it just turned into something absolutely amazing.
That's exciting. Thank you, Claire, for sharing that.
I'll chime in here. So Claire was talking about our teacher workshops. In our partner communities, we actually have an agreement with the local regional and the Department of Loreto, the Department of Education, in that we are able to hire and move teachers with some parameters, but that's the basic of it. And that really opens up a lot of room for us to provide support for environmental education with our teacher workshop. And Claire did a great job describing the after effects of those teacher workshops and how teachers get excited about that. I want to highlight what Claire mentioned earlier when she introduced herself about this new partnership. We have a partnership with the Detroit Zoo. We've had it for many years, but recently we have now collaborated with the zoo and another organization called One Planet to create conversations around conservation within communities. So we're working with the adults in communities, and we're talking about what resources look like in the past, and what they want their future to look like, and what kinds of things might threaten those. And these conversations are they're conversations. We are not lecturing. We are not defining anything. They are providing the definition. The end of these workshops, we have written a vision, not we, sorry, that was the wrong word. They have written a vision statement for their community about what they want their community to be and look like when it comes to their resources. And this was, again, with the support of the Detroit Zoo and another organization, One Planet. One Planet works exclusively with the 4 Mahuna communities, of which 3 are within our partnerships. We have 3 of them in our partnerships. And the Mahuna are currently under the imminent threat of a road. It's going to cut right through their ancestral lands, an area of almost, I think, it's 1 million acres that have been reserved. And we have a belief within CONAPAC that the surrounding neighborhood communities didn't even know that this is going to happen, and that this will impact them as well. These are hunting lands, these are fishing lands, the widespread, just what comes out of building a road and how that road encroaches on other parts of the forest. And so part of our workshop includes that. And again, it is not us lecturing. It is completely participatory. And without the support from both the Detroit Zoo and One Planet in helping to devise these and fund them, these workshops, we wouldn't be doing them. And this is our chance to really work on those other parts, the assumption that we come in with all the knowledge, the lack of support afterwards. Like, we are really trying to address those things within this program. And from that, we will have voices from every community to build upon. And that's the hope, right?
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, Megan. Those vision statements sound, it just sort of, I go to imagining what those vision statements might hold and how they vary across communities. Lily, do you want to jump in before I keep going?
Yeah, I mostly just wanted to add a quick comment with respect to Claire's mention of WhatsApp groups, because it sounds like Peru is like Costa Rica, that WhatsApp groups are a big thing and probably one of the most powerful modes of maintaining communication and building community around a shared, interest, passion, topic, goal. And I see that in the hundreds of WhatsApp groups I've become part of. I have to admit, when I first moved to Costa Rica, I was like, oh my gosh, this is too much, like too much activity, too much simulation. I've adjusted to the WhatsApp groups and realized that they really are one of the best tools for building community. Finca Cántaros collaborates with one of the local monitoring brigades. So we're in that WhatsApp group, and it's just amazing to see people sharing photos of, all the species they might encounter that week, and ask questions of each other about, well, what is this species? What does it do? And it kind of goes back to the point about cultivating love rather than gloom and doom. It's a space for people to just get excited about nature and feel happy and inspired by what they're seeing in nature. And I think those spaces are really important for cultivating long-term success in this field of, rainforest education, because I don't see things in that group that are, negative. It's positive, and people are getting outside to explore. And like I said, I think WhatsApp groups have a real power to create that community. And, as much as it's like, well, we're on our phones more, unfortunately, that's kind of the way things are now. And I think using our phones as a tool to connect around something as important as the rainforest is a positive thing.
That's great. All right, so we have a handful of strategies that we're working on now, things we're already doing that are working. So the question that sort of goes hand in hand with that is, what else could we do? So really at this point, thinking of small, actionable strategies that are really within our sphere of influence. What additional steps would you like to take, again, within your roles and communities, or sort of that wider education community? So like where would we go next? What would be sort of on your wish list next? Anyone want to kick us off? I think we lost Ursula.
Yeah, Ursula went off into the rainforest, and I'm a little bit jealous, to be honest. Something that we've been tossing around for a minute, and we haven't really figured out how to do it effectively yet, but I have a big passion for it, is we have access to technology, right? The teachers and the communities have access to this on a fairly regular basis. What are we doing to connect this amazing resource of people and knowledge in the rainforest back here to home, right? How are we connecting classrooms in our communities to those global experiences and connecting with youth in other parts of the world? Because I'm pretty sure that's the only way that we're going to start fixing our global crisis, is if we start globalizing students earlier and providing them authentic connections with other people with other lived experiences around the world. And having connections to so many teachers and young people in two different hemispheres is, I think, a little bit of a responsibility that we start thinking about what that looks like to make it a productive and engaging experience. I had a very small glimpse of it in a course that I took a couple years ago, and we were working with students in Brazil. And I mean, almost every barrier you can think of now you can tear down, right? You've got the chats, language isn't a barrier. Google Translate's actually pretty decent now. I mean, it used to be a little sketchy, but you can get a pretty good conversation and trains that back. So I think there's a tremendous amount of potential and also a sense of responsibility that we start connecting, especially students, with each other across global lines.
That's great.
And I would love to build on that and mention that I wouldn't be sitting in the seat if it wasn't for Morpho Institute. When I first visited the rainforest, I was a teacher. I came with the Educator Academy in the Amazon, which is one of Morpho's programs. And I was in shock, honestly, because I had a lot of things that I thought would be, and then learned very quickly that it was not the way I thought. And so I was able to take that information back to my students. And this is something that Morpho does really, really well, is kind of addresses those misconceptions or ideas that we hold when you're not in the place and you think you know about the place. You don't really realize until you get to the place, right? And I don't know if I said that well enough, but maybe you understand what I'm saying. Morpho does this really, really well. And one of the things that now, with me sitting in this seat, CONAPAC is doing is partnering with Morpho on more broadening of kind of that sort of feeling. So teachers who come on the Morpho Institute program spend time in communities. And in one of the situations that we're doing in a community, the students in the community become the teachers, and they are teaching the participants their local understandings and knowledge. And it's really fabulous. We're getting ready to do this in a couple of weeks, and I'm super excited to do this again. And it's so powerful. But these are kind of the experiences that teachers from other countries, the more affluent countries, can take and bring to their classrooms with that energy and that excitement and that empowerment and engagement. And it really, really pulls kids in, speaking from experience as both a teacher and now a person who lives and talks to teachers from that distance. And we would love to find more ways to engage teachers from a distance. And as Claire mentioned, technology is getting better. I mean, half of our communities now have Wi-Fi installed. It's not perfect Wi-Fi. It is not 4G, but we can send text messages at the minimum. Some communities it has good enough to do video. And so we would love to continue to increase that exposure of what really in the place means, and that it's not just you know, the beloved books that we grew up reading that brought us to the rainforest. And so that's something that we're building on, we're talking about. We haven't quite gotten to the best of it yet, but we're getting there step by step. And Morpho Institute has been great in getting those ideas and bouncing those off and bringing teachers to the Amazon.
That's great. Thank you, Megan.
I think from Finca Cántaros' perspective, I share some similar dreams and visions about just getting the word out there more, to people that can come visit us in Costa Rica, but also obviously I'm working as hard as I can in the local community to get the message out, because, something that's really important to me is making sure that the local community has access to that information as well. Sometimes we can focus too much on like the foreigners coming down, but I want to make sure that somebody who lives next door to Finca Cántaros knows what we're doing and why it's important and what restoration is. And so, just trying to, as Megan said, with respect to misconceptions, I try to talk about, what, like I was saying before, like the misconception about tree growing, like how we need to focus on the longer term process, because tree planting is really just one point on a very long, timeline. It begins with selecting, begins well before selecting and cultivating the right native species, choosing an appropriate place to grow those trees. And then afterwards, it requires the planning and the organization and the resources to do the maintenance and all that. So kind of breaking down the misconception about tree growing projects or forest restoration, when people hear about 1 billion trees planted, and that sounds all well and good, but what does that really mean? How are people really engaging in that? And you hear campaigns sometimes, at least I've seen less of it lately, but where they say, oh, plant a tree for $1. And I'm like, well, now that I've been involved in this for a few years now, I'm like, that's not realistic. In fact, that's kind of, propaganda about something that's in my mind not going to be very effective, because you can't grow a tree for $1. Maybe you can plant it, but even then it's unlikely. And to have that long-term care and stewardship, $1 isn't gonna cut it. So there's the misconception piece, but there's also, I think, even more importantly, the hope piece, because we are so inundated every single day with all this terrible news about all the hectares of rainforest burning away. And something that gives me hope and gives me a beautiful start to the day is I always walk in one area of our property that we did the first restoration project on, called the Children's Forest of Coto Brus. That's the name of the county we're in. And that was planted just 4 years ago. And there are literally trees above my head now that have created leaf litter below, and the shade is above my head. And that is in 4 years. And I've actually watched this happen with my own eyes. And, that's just not a very long amount of time. So when humans do decide to put their minds and effort to something, we can do it very successfully and very well. And I think people need to hear more of that, good news, because as we've all been saying throughout the course of this panel, just hearing the gloom and doom is really uninspiring. It doesn't, make you want to jump out of bed and go do something. It makes you want to hide under the covers or binge Netflix all day and pretend that it's not happening out there. So I think it's really important to show people that there can be positive change in a relatively short amount of time, especially here in the tropics, where if the trees are grown and maintained and stewarded well, then they will grow, and you can see that with your own eyes. And I think that positivity and that encouragement is what will get us all out of bed, not only as educators, but as participants that we want to engage in this work. And we want to build that network as much as possible. So I just think focusing on the hope message as well is so important, and that's part of my vision and goal, is to get that message out as far and wide as possible, but start primarily here in the local community.
Wonderful. All right, we are getting short on time, and I do want to leave some time for audience questions, but all of this really brings us to our driving question about what matters most in education. So we've been sort of building up to this point. So for our last question, what are really the through lines here in this conversation? What has cut through thinking about really what we don't want to do and those counterproductive activities, and how we can move away from that in these actionable strategies. But what's sort of the through line to really help us think about what matters most in rainforest education? This is the hard question. By the way, this is sort of the culmination of what we've been talking about. So really thinking of that now that 30,000-foot view of what we've been talking about, which sometimes it's harder. We've just been talking about the action items, and those are sometimes the hard pieces. So we're doing this sort of level shift to think about, you know, sort of that large scale, what matters most.
I think that unto itself, Ava, is one of the through lines, is like the, you know, what matters most. And we were talking a lot about hope as one of the things that matters most, and not just focusing on the gloom and doom. So I feel like that theme has been recurrent throughout the course of this panel, as has been the, you know, the through line of continuous engagement with the community and with diverse voices in the community as well. And I didn't want to jump in because I wanted to see if Ursula was able to connect and share, since she missed part of it. But so I'll stop there with those 2 points. But to me, those were 2 key themes that jumped out particularly on this panel.
I would agree. And the fact that we continue challenging ourselves, challenging what we know and our practice and what we think the best practice is. The fact that we constantly continue to challenge ourselves and allow ourselves the space to take risks, but also to learn and grow. I mean, my stance on conservation has changed, I mean, like 180 since in the last 15 years. And I continue to learn every single day. So just to continue embracing that process and making sure that we're continuing to do the best thing with the best intentions.
And then I think just who do you have at the table and who's missing?
Fantastic. Let me just recap these ideas and then I'll open it up to the audience. So I'm definitely hearing, I think one of our through lines is really about these participatory approaches that are seeking to democratize the process. And we heard a lot of really concrete strategies to do that, but really to engage on the margins and actively pursue voices that might not come forward on their own. So that really is that diverse approaches through workshops and collaboratives that are going to bring as many to the table as we can. And in that, really, there is that challenging ourselves, like Claire was just talking about, and pushing forward on that front line to keep ourselves growing beyond sort of that status quo or what we've just been used to from our own past. And using that to really create these messages of hope, stories of hope that we can really then broadcast far and wide to classrooms and learning spaces outside of the rainforest, but then also really make sure that those local connections are still running in place, and really digging down deep into those. So let me open it up to the panel. We don't have a lot of time, but let me open it up to the audience. If folks want to throw some questions into the chat, I believe that's the best way to do this. So we'll just pause for like 30, maybe like 10 seconds at this point to let folks put some questions in, and then I'll share them to the panel. Okay, so Susan is asking a question. How do you recharge yourself, especially when things get overwhelming?
I know I just shared this anecdote, but it's worth repeating again, which is, for me, starting the day looking at the growth of the trees in our restoration project that we just planted 4 years ago really helps me kind of center myself, because, you know, sometimes in the morning my brain is all over here, like what I need to do on the to-do list, like this, that, and the other, and this thing is, you know, got to be done, this email needs to be sent, and this, that, and the other. And sometimes I just need to remind myself, like, take a breath and look at the trees that you and community members planted. Like, that is a tangible thing, and now you are seeing the literal fruits of your labor. And that really just helps, like, center me and get me out of kind of like the, you know, logistic chaos going on in my head, and focus on what is the bigger picture and the important picture. And that, I find, really helps recharge me.
And Lily, I noticed when you were speaking about that earlier, the way you were speaking and how you were describing it sounded like a description of the feeling awe. So just to bring us back to where we started, that feeling of awe is both a strategy in education and a personal strategy for sort of dealing with that feeling of being overwhelmed and maintaining that hope and recharging ourselves. So I just wanted to reconnect to that because I saw it on your face when you were describing that forest. So we have 1 minute left. So I just want to take time to thank everyone for proposing these ideas, and audience members, we didn't have a lot of time to engage deeply with you, but these questions are really ones you can ask yourselves for this topic or really other ones. And I also want to highlight there were several times in the panel where our panelists were describing transformative experiences and either how they had those themselves, like Megan was describing, or how they brought them to their students or engaged their community in that process of transformation. And I think that's a really powerful part when we think about what matters most in education, is that we really were talking about tools to build those types of transformative experiences for learners of all stages and places. So we'll end on that. It's exactly 11 o'clock now, but a sincere thank you to everyone here in the audience, to the Morpho Institute, and for World Rainforest Day. And I hope the rest of the day is really wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ava. Thank you, everyone. Happy Rainforest Day.
Thank you so much. This is a really fantastic space. Happy Rainforest Day.